Let's get going. 8:32. Thank you all for coming so early and joining us for our morning coffee webinar series. My name is Matt Stinchcomb. I'm one of the co-founders of Partners for Climate Action, Hudson Valley, PCA, and I'm really thrilled that you're with us today, and really honored to have Tracy Brown with us from Riverkeeper. Really, such a seminal and essential organization for the Hudson Valley. For those of you who don't know, PCA is a nonprofit organization. We're a project of the New World Foundation. And we were founded in 2019 with the goal to move multiple forms of capital to where they'd be most relevant, efficient, and effective to catalyze local action. So at our core, we are funders. So we do a lot of funding, but we also run a lot of programs. And we aim to support our grantee partners with knowledge, tools, and connections they need to be successful. So we're working across the whole estuary watershed as our bioregion, and really trying to give everybody what they need to take care of their places. So today, we've got Tracy Brown here. Tracy Brown is the president and Hudson Riverkeeper and became so in 2021. She's the fourth person to lead the organization as president since its founding in 1966 as the Hudson River Fishermen's Association. A recognized leader in clean water advocacy, Tracy brings a multidisciplinary approach to Riverkeeper, prioritizing data-driven, community-oriented strategies to realize their mission. She previously served as Regional Director of Water Protection at Save the Sound, establishing their New York office, which delivers science-based projects that protect Long Island Sound and increase community resilience. During her tenure, she established water quality monitoring programs and reporting tools that helped increase federal funding to the Sound Estuary Program tenfold. She integrated the Long Island Soundkeeper into Save the Sound, continuing and expanding upon the legacy of a fellow Waterkeeper organization. Prior to joining Save the Sound, Tracy worked at Riverkeeper for 7 years, where she was instrumental in developing Riverkeeper's water quality monitoring programs and also leading its communications efforts. Among other achievements, she was an architect of New York's Sewage Pollution Right to Know Act, which was enacted in 2013, and which led to historic state reinvestment in our sewage infrastructure. Tracy lives in Sleepy Hollow, New York, is a founder of the Peabody Preserve Outdoor Classroom, a nature preserve for hands-on outdoor education for the students of the Tarrytown Sleepy Hollow Public Schools. She has served on numerous boards and policy committees and is currently the co-chair of the Water Committee for the Westchester County Climate Crisis Task Force. Earlier in her career, she worked in the fields of fine art, web design, interactive media, and community organizing. She is a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, and in her free time, she can usually be found swimming or paddling in the Hudson or hiking somewhere within the watershed. Tracy, wow, very, very great to have you here today. Thank you so much for all the really important work that you do. And we're really honored that you can join us. So with that, I'm going to pass this off to Tracy, who's going to give a presentation, and then we will open it up for Q&A. So if you have questions, please just put them into the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat and trying to get to everybody's questions. I'll look at themes that many people are asking about, and while I may not ask your specific question, I'll try to make sure we're covering those areas. Last little bit of housekeeping. As you probably saw when you entered, this is being recorded. So if you're not cool with that, then you should probably go. No, just kidding. But we do like to post these later so that people can watch them again. And for those of us who aren't able to join in person, they'll be able to see a recording. If links or other resources are mentioned, we'll send them out to the group after the webinar. So with that, welcome Tracy Brown.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much, Partners for Climate Action, for inviting me here to talk about the topic near and dear to my heart, water and the Hudson Valley bioregion. So my topic today is Drought and Deluge, what the future of water looks like for the Hudson Valley. There we go. It's one of my favorite all-time photos on the right, humpback whale breaching in Brooklyn with the New York skyline in the background. So today I'm going to talk about just an overview of who is Riverkeeper, the nexus of climate impacts on water, and then I'm going to get into actions. What can we do? What can you do? What is Riverkeeper doing? And then we can open it up for discussion. So Riverkeeper's mission is to protect and restore the Hudson River from source to sea and safeguard drinking water supplies through advocacy rooted in community partnership, science, and law. This is our beautiful estuary on the right with the three major watersheds. I should say our overall watershed with the sub-watersheds highlighted. So the Hudson River is 315 miles long. 153 of that is in our tidal estuary, which is that purple lower watershed shape on the map. And the Hudson provides so many things. It's really the defining feature of our region. And that includes transportation, energy, food, commerce, recreation, inspiration, and drinking water. So Riverkeeper's priorities, we do a lot of work, and we're just going to talk about a slice of it today. But just to give you a sense, very high level, breaking them into four categories, we focus on improving water quality and public access to the river, mitigating and adapting to climate change, which we'll get into a piece of that today, safeguarding drinking water, and restoring habitats and wildlife, supporting the restoration and rebound of wildlife in our bioregion. And here's some of that beautiful wildlife. The tools that we use to do this work include the law, science, and community engagement. So we focus on holding polluters and government accountable, cleaning the Hudson River system and removing dams to support life in the river and the restoration of the river and its tributary streams and creeks, and working in partnerships with community groups like PCA and many others, as well as local individual activists who want to do this work to make our waterways and our drinking water safe and healthy. So today's topic is water and climate. So this is a quote, "Water is the primary medium through which we will feel the effects of climate change," from a UN report. And I know in the Valley, we're all experiencing this. New York actually is one of the locations on the planet that is experiencing the impacts and the changes from climate change faster than the global average, because we are in a very wet area, and we're in an area where a lot of water's kind of joining and coming into, a bigger system, and sometimes which narrows and creates a lot of pressure in our hydrological system. So, I'm going to talk about what we can do to respond to what we're already experiencing. And you can see a picture here. This is the Rondout flooding in Kingston in this photo below. But I do want to take a moment and just say we have to do everything that we all possibly can to fight the effects of climate change. This is about adaptation, but I just want to acknowledge, climate change is real, it's bad, it's happening, we're living through it, and it is something we all have to be very deeply engaging with every day to be mitigating the impacts. So what are we seeing in the region? We are seeing increasing temperatures. So I'm talking about water temperatures increasing. They're projected to go up to 10 degrees by the end of the century. And this also results in seasonal shifts, which also results in some wildlife shifts in response to that. We're also seeing sea level rise, even though it's called sea level rise. We're in a tidal estuary up to that 153 mark. So sea level rise affects that whole section of our tidal estuary. The Hudson River water has been increasing and is estimated to increase another 1 to 2 feet by mid-century. So we're talking just in, a couple decades here. Also, salinity in the Hudson is increasing, and our salt front is moving higher north in the system. And then from the more increased rains, we see an increased risk of storm surge, like we all experienced during Sandy and other storms, where we're getting the deluge from the top and storms that can go up above north of us in the system. Like I think it was Ida, was a northern system, and then we get them from the south in the surges when we have hurricanes that come up the coast. So, and that increasing precipitation, the deluge, it's not just the big storms. We're seeing more precipitation, more of these flashy storm events where they're kind of isolated but very heavy, in addition to the extreme weather events. So, really, the weather patterns have changed and are continuing and will continue to change. So, we're looking at a up to 17% projected increase in the volume of rain within the next 50 years. But then there's also drought. And sometimes when we have these rainy seasons, we forget that there is also drought. And last year we experienced drought. And I think we have some drought level conditions within the estuary right now. So it's this cycle of deluge and drought that really puts a lot of stress on our natural systems and is creating new challenges in terms of keeping our water clean and safe. And then we have these conditions combining. So you have the combination of these effects, like the sequence of drought and deluge, and then you have cascading knock-on effects and feedback loops. So just two examples. Last year we had the droughts and it was hot. That's part of what drives the droughts. Then we got wildfires, and then we have new pollutant entering the air system from the fires, which drop down on our surface drinking water reservoirs and in our recreational water. On the other side, we have the deluge events that bring a lot more nutrients. The Hudson is already a very nutrient-rich system, and with all of this rain, we're ratcheting up the amount of nutrients in the Hudson and other waterways. And then that combined with the warmer waters, which means lower oxygen in the water because warm water holds less oxygen, then we get more algal blooms. So algal blooms is another one of these manifestations of multiple shifts driven by climate. So now I'm going to talk about some of the actions we can take. And it's got to be local action and it's got to be systemic change. So starting with the category of how is the drought and deluge cycle and climate impacts affecting our waterways and the wildlife in our waterways? So what we are experiencing is a decline in oxygen, what we call eutrophication, and fish need oxygen to live. They actually do respirate with oxygen. So low oxygen conditions can trigger fish die-offs and just overall increase in mortality for fish. We also are seeing the increased algal blooms and threats of algal blooms, and some of these are harmful algal blooms. We are seeing increased ocean acidification, and I put that in quotes because that's one of those things we kind of misnamed early on as we were learning what it is, and it's too bad because actually we now know with more recent science that the acidification of our waterways is actually most common in bays and harbors and estuaries and the more closed system than the open ocean. And this is the acidification that makes it hard for shellfish to form shells, crustaceans to form their shells. It's harmful to coral reef and other life in the water. And then we have increased dam failures. So we have over 2,000 abandoned or non-functioning dams within the Hudson River estuary system alone. And some of these dams are 80 to 100 years old. They were designed largely for industry. They're mill dams for local factories, and they were not designed to be sitting in place for 100 years. And they were certainly not designed for the types of stress that some of these bigger storms are now putting on them. And the way that we see the impact of these changes is we see declining marine life. We have seen dramatic declines in the mass volume of key fish species in the Hudson River estuary and habitat decline and decay. So what can we do? There are things we can do and must do and are doing. And I'm going to kind of give the examples of how Riverkeeper is doing this work. But this is work I want everyone on the call to think about ways you can engage in it in your community, in whatever not-for-profit community or faith organizations you work with, on your private property, and support us and work with us taking this bioregional approach that we do. So I'll put the easy one first, which is just saving the green spaces that we already have. The do no harm approach. It is easy to say, but it's hard to do in practice because there is a lot of pressure to develop. I think we all hear about the shortage of housing, and we know how incredibly powerful developers are within our communities. So Riverkeeper worked for many legislative sessions to get protections for our remaining wetlands in the state. The wetlands are ecological gold. Wetlands give us dividends in terms of dealing with the flooding issues I just addressed, providing habitat that is really viable and helpful to the wildlife who are under distress. They clean the water when we have increased stormwater runoff and the nutrients coming into our waterways. The wetlands and planted buffers treat that water naturally and pull a lot of pollutants out and a lot of nutrients out. So they're just incredibly valuable. And the state law for years and years has been that the state will protect wetlands that are 12 acres or larger. So that's a very big wetland. Anything smaller than 12 acres had no protection, and the smaller ones could be filled and built on without any real oversight from an ecological point of view. So we did get some legislation passed last session, or maybe it was 2 sessions ago, that finally tightened that. And it took years because there was so much opposition from developers, but we did get new law that allows the state to regulate smaller wetlands by assessing and designating which ones are valuable that they could intervene on behalf of in the permitting processes. Now they're being sued for that law. Industry has organized. There's a whole bunch that is suing New York State saying that it's an overreach and those wetlands shouldn't be protected. So a lot of this work happens on the local level. It happens in your planning boards. So please, you can go online and look at wetland mappers, know where the local wetlands are, and really make that kind of a red line area to be protected and preserved. Another thing that we can all engage in is managing the stormwater. So really our more developed communities are designed with drainage systems where you have the grate at the side of the road for it to rain and for the rain to, as quickly as possible, hit that drainage system on the curb cut, and then it goes through pipes and it gets dumped into the nearest stream, river, creek, or bay, whatever the nearest waterway is. So it's just kind of designed to immediately take runoff from the road. We call that, it is rain, but once it hits the road and picks up the oil and grease and debris and pollutants from the road, we call it stormwater. And it's just pumping it into our rivers and streams. So we really need to be capturing that rain as rain in place. And there's an example here on the left of a curb cut that, instead of having the edge of the curb go right into a drain that goes into a pipe that goes to a stream, it goes into a water retention natural planted installation where there's greenery on the top and usually there's some retaining space underneath it. So it's actually kind of a planted over an invisible water retention tank that can take a lot of water in heavy rain, and then it slowly filters it back into the groundwater over time after the rain event passes. So we got to double down on getting green infrastructure. We call this universe of work green infrastructure in our communities, on our public properties, on our school properties. So these would be rain gardens, trees on the street. Trees are actually the best form of green infrastructure when you look at ability to capture rain and recharge it into the ground. They do the best work. So we can't have too many trees. And then on the right, this just illustrates the importance of having plantings at the edge of all of our waterways to slow down again stormwater and the contaminants in our stormwater. If you are lucky enough to live on a stream or a creek or right on the Hudson, please plant a buffer in front of your house, like that house on the left, to help keep the pollutants out of the river naturally. And then the other approach to stormwater is what we call gray infrastructure. So this is pipes and pumps and cement and things that are not green and natural. But we also need a lot of these. Matt mentioned the sewage right to know law in the intro. That is a law that Riverkeeper worked to pass to bring visibility to how much our gray infrastructure, our sewage collection pipes have been failing, what a state of disrepair they are in. And since we got that law passed, it really raised awareness because it's a public notification requirement for communities that anytime there is sewage getting out of your collection infrastructure or your treatment plant, including a combined sewer overflow, that they are legally mandated to report it within 4 hours of discovery to the state, which then pushes it out on NIAlert. Any of you can sign up for an alert county by county within the state and know every time sewage is leaking. And this is really important if you're someone who does open water swimming like I do, or if you're just down fishing or kayaking or having contact with the river. It's really important that you know if there's sewage getting in the river because it is a serious health impact. So coming on the end of that, a knock-on effect of that law has been the state providing more funding to fix our pipes and our pumps. So that's the water, wastewater treatment upgrades that I list here at the top of the list. It's ongoing work. The state just approved again the clean water infrastructure funding. I think we're up over 5 billion that's been distributed so far to communities since 2017 when that law passed. The state comptroller has identified the need in New York State at 80 billion in terms of getting to state of good repair and catching up where investments weren't made. Anyhow, I can talk a lot more about that if anyone wants to at the end, but suffice to say, we have to stay focused on our gray infrastructure, be proactive in maintaining it. And I put wastewater in quotes. That's the industry term, but I don't think there's such a thing as wastewater anymore. We can no longer waste water, so we need to update our language too. Okay, and then moving on to our in-river work. We are very focused, obviously, on restoring the Hudson and all of its beautiful tributary streams and creeks. We do this with a massive annual sweep where we get hundreds of people out to a couple hundred locations across the estuary, and we pick up tons of trash. We also have started doing invasive species removal and native plant planting. And the reason for that is after doing the sweep for more than a decade now, we're actually seeing less trash at these sites. So the work is really making a difference. There is less and less trash. The sweep I went to this year in Highland Falls, we were down to like bottle caps and cigarette butts, where in the past there were tires and bikes and, Dunkin' Donut cups. So it really is having an impact, and it's letting us shift now to planting and targeting invasive species, which is great. So I encourage anyone who likes to get out and do this type of volunteer work, please go to the riverkeeper.org site and sign up for a future sweep. We also are removing dams, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a picture of a dam coming down. There are over 2,000 abandoned dams. They are both harmful to our wildlife because they're keeping fish from getting up into these streams where they need the habitat for spawning. And also a lot of these little streams and creeks are cooler and better and safer habitat for marine life in the summer. And they also are increasing flooding and flood risk. Right now, we are working on a number of dams. We're kind of working our way up the Quasaya Creek that reaches the Hudson in Newburgh. And we have dams there that they're in such a tightly developed area that if they fail before they're removed, there could be catastrophic consequences in terms of damage to community and threat to life. So it's a win-win-win all around. And honestly, the biggest challenge is getting the funding and the permitting. It's a long haul to get to this point on any of these projects, but we're committed to doing it. It's a core part of our work. And then just also mentioning laws and regulations. There are laws to protect our waterways. We already had plenty of opportunity to go in where existing laws weren't being enforced and take enforcement under the Clean Water Act and other protections in normal days. Now, with the federal government, pulling down the staff on law enforcement so dramatically, I'm sure that part of the work is going to increase and demand more time and attention and resources. We have a watchdog kind of system set up. I would encourage all of you to, again, go to riverkeeper.org, look at the watchdog reporting area. What we do is when people see anything that they think is pollution in a waterway in the Hudson Valley, you can call us. There's an 800 number. You can email. We have it set up so you can do it anonymously, but we do want pictures and times and locations. And then we follow up, investigate, and take action to get law enforcement there or to take legal action if we're not supported by existing law enforcement and the state or the city who's responsible. So please be our eyes and ears and help us continue to make sure that these laws are enforced, because a law without enforcement is just a piece of paper. There's nothing if you don't follow up and do the enforcement piece. And then the second topic that I'm covering is the water impacts to drinking water. So not everybody realizes how much of our portfolio drinking water is. And I will say, given what I'm about to share with you, you'll see that this also, I think, will be increasing in coming years. So drinking water is impacted by increased salinity, which we're already experiencing. So I mentioned the salt wedge moving further north. This has to do with the change in sea level, the change in temperature. So we're concerned about salinity reaching the Hudson 7 communities that drink out of the Hudson River. That would be something that if we don't get in front of and plan for, if it is going to happen, it would have catastrophic impacts. This is what happened in Flint, Michigan, is they had salt that got into what was previously a freshwater drinking supply, and the salt corroded pipes and released lead and other contaminants that then got in and contaminated the drinking water. So we have successfully got New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to agree to do a study so we can get in front of this and understand, is the salt wedge going to get that far, and start to put plans in place proactively before that happens. We also are seeing salt intrusion in the groundwater and in underwater drinking water supplies. This is more common at the coast, but where you're by marine water, but we have a crisis around road salts. We are putting such excessive amounts of road salts on our streets when it is going to snow, and then sometimes it snows and sometimes it doesn't. We leave the salt out there until it basically just, the rain just pushes it into the landscape and it filters down and gets into our groundwater. So we are increasing the salinity of our groundwater. This picture in the background is the Croton Aqueduct system. It's part of the New York City drinking water infrastructure. It's the east of Hudson, over by me, not very far up the road here. This is the water I drink from, and as do a lot of people in Westchester. This system, the Croton system, is at risk of becoming too salty to drink by the end of the century. And it has multiple reservoirs, and one of the reservoirs within the Croton system is going to be too salty to drink by 2087 at current rates of increase of salinity. And Riverkeeper, we have a terrific scientist now who's a drinking water expert, Shannon Roback. She did a survey of drinking water reports with some interns for all of the drinking water supplies in the Hudson Valley and found that already more than half of them have salinity that exceeds the recommended threshold for people on low salt diets. So we are far down this path and need to really double down addressing this salt problem. We also have the pollution from wildfires that I mentioned, which is a new and increasing threat that we have to be planning for and organizing around. We have increased turbidity, that's the soil, the runoff coming in from heavy storms, and also from the droughts where the water levels are going up and down within the reservoirs more frequently, suspending sediment within the reservoir and adding more to it from the landscape. And then with the droughts, we have more unreliable availability of drinking water. So what can we do? A few things we can do. So this picture is this is students that we are working with in Troy at the Media Sanctuary, and we developed a curriculum called Source to Sea for the students to understand where their drinking water comes from, and it includes water quality monitoring with our staff. And that curriculum we also have rolled out in Kingston recently, and we're looking to expand it across the estuary just to raise water literacy among all of our residents so we can all be involved in protecting our drinking water sources. I will also say that Riverkeeper in August is going to be launching a new expanded water quality portal where we'll have our usual monitoring data, but we're also going to be sharing information about drinking water sources. It's going to show you, you could go into the map and see where your drinking water comes from. You can get a copy of your the water quality report for your drinking water, and then explanation of what it means, what's being reported in your water quality report. And we're also going to have more information about fish and marine health. So really excited. And maybe PCA will have us back after that portal comes up and we can share that and go a little deeper into these issues. But for now, suffice to say, the work at hand is identifying what is the source of your drinking water. Not everybody knows this. We actually worked with Peekskill, where they have a reservoir that they drink out of, and it's actually in a neighboring town. And they thought that the reservoir was where all their water came from and where the protection was focused. And then there's Peekskill Hollow Brook that connects that reservoir to their drinking water treatment plant in Peekskill. And it turned out, based on our work with them, that actually 80% of their drinking water was coming from the brook. They weren't taking enough to actually tap the reservoir. They were drinking brook water, which was not protected and had a bunch of threats and issues. So we're working with them. So that's just an example of number one. Number two, support a development of a local drinking water source protection plan. This is another legislative initiative that we worked on. Dan Shapley was very key in this, and this was spurred by the contamination of Newburgh's drinking water with PFAS. It was a real wake up in the region. It came very close on the tails of Hoosick Falls, which came close on the tails of Flint, Michigan, and it just kind of raised everyone's awareness that, man, we really don't all know where our drinking water is coming from or have a plan to protect it. So this is something you can now do with the state, and I encourage everyone to talk to their local leaders about getting one in place. And I mentioned we do the monitoring. We're expanding our monitoring this year to look at more parameters around drinking water, and of course, again, enforcing laws. It's essential. We also protect the New York City drinking water watershed in particular. That's kind of how we started getting into this drinking water work back in the 80s. That provides the drinking water for half of the population of New York State. 9 million people drink out of that upstate reservoir system. So this is an image of Esopus Creek. You have the Ashokan Reservoir and this turbid plume that was coming from releases from the reservoir into Esopus Creek. And we worked for years on a campaign called Stop the Mud to try and stop these releases from happening, because turbidity, this kind of heavy plumes of sediment, is a form of pollution, and it is harmful to marine life. And it was really harming the Esopus Creek. So finally, just this past year, we reached an agreement between the communities, Ulster County and the city, on how to better manage this reservoir and be more protective of the Esopus Creek. So a lot of community support, a lot of partners. I'm sure some of them, people on the phone, were involved in that. So we're very happy to have made progress there. But we're looking at emerging contaminants. PFAS is a big issue. We're looking at increased turbidity across the board, the wildfires, and the reliability. So it's a universe of challenges, and you'll be hearing more from us on this in the coming years. And then the final thing, so, we learn about all these problems on the ground, and we learn as we do this work what systemically is causing problems. It be it not enough funding, not the right laws, not the right regs. And so in recent years, Riverkeeper's really invested in our policy team. And here, I'm in these pictures with Jeremy Churzin, who's the head of our government affairs team. He's super talented. These are pictures from DC. We were down there 2 weeks ago lobbying, but we do most of our lobbying in Albany. So it's really important to know those levers. And in addition to doing the lobbying work, showing up, providing expertise to these legislators who are dealing with so many issues, they really rely on experts like the staff at Riverkeeper and other not-for-profits, once you can build relationships to help them sort through issues and give them raw materials. So this is just so impactful and so important, but it does work hand in hand with the local work, because having those examples and saying, we're trying to fund these dam removals, or we're trying to reduce PFAS and there's no regulations on what's an acceptable level in drinking water, or we're trying to protect the NOAA funding, which was one of the things we were talking about in these meetings here. The cuts we're expecting to happen to NOAA and how that will specifically affect the Hudson Valley. And I show a bipartisan set of leaders here. We have Congressman Josh Riley and then Congressman like Mike Lawler. They're both on the Science and Technology Committee that oversees NOAA. So even though they weren't collaborating at this moment on how to protect NOAA funds for the Hudson Valley, once this is how lobbying works. You go to one and say, these are the problems, here's the memo, this is what we want you to do. And they say, okay, will they help across the aisle? You go across the aisle, here's the problems, here's the memo. Will you help? Yes. You go back and forth and get these two people on one letter, and that's how change happens. So very grateful to have these relationships and be able to do some of that work. And that is it for the speaking part. Thank you for listening, and I'm interested to hear people's questions.
Tracy, thank you so much. Very informative, very sobering. Clearly, lots of work that needs to happen. Thank you all for starting to put some questions into the chat. I encourage you to do so. Let's just jump right into it, because there's a lot a lot to cover here. I wanted to talk a little bit more about sea level rise. You showed that very upsetting photo of the Rondout in Kingston. I think that was maybe during Sandy, but you could go there on any day at high tide and be driving through water on those roads down along the waterfront. I'm curious about infrastructure, and I think so much about the railway tracks. So much of our sewage treatment and water treatment are all really right there at the level of the river. Are there plans underway right now to move or elevate or adapt this infrastructure at all? And given the federal government's, kind of like commitment to destroying all that is at all pro-ecological, how might that be impacted? And, is the state stepping up at all? There's a lot in there. I'd just be curious about infrastructure and sea level rise in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah. So, what I've learned is that these agencies work very much in silos. So when you ask about the infrastructure, it depends on which agency you're talking about. So, for example, the wastewater community after Sandy, the wastewater community was pretty proactive, and they went and they took all of like the generators that were on the ground level and moved them up to upper levels and did other things they could do within the plants, because in Sandy we had wastewater treatment plants inundated and go offline, and we had untreated waste just being pumped directly into our waterways for weeks after that, including in Yonkers in Westchester, where I live. So then on the other hand, you have the super slow ones, like the Department of Transportation, especially rails. Like it's mind blowing that Metro North doesn't have a plan yet. And they just recently had an open house public meeting on their plans for the Hudson River section, just very at the very south. It was like, out of New York City to the Tappan Zee Bridge. And I went, and one of my attorneys went with me. And basically, the plan was a plan to plan. We know we have to do something. We don't know how we're going to pay for it. We don't know when it's going to happen or what it is. But here's an image, and the image was basically here's the landscape. Here's a drainage pipe for stormwater that goes under the track. Here's the track, and here's a wall. Was basically like the vision was we're going to build a wall. So we've put the train track between all these communities in the Hudson. So you all have to kind of look over the trains or cross over the trains to access the river. Now we're going to put a giant wall there. So they're so far behind. It's stunning. Um, I will say, as an example of what we need to do when you look in New York City has started to make pivots and create roles that look at climate impacts and preparing for flooding and inundation that can cut across agencies. So they created a Bureau of Coastal Management that goes from DOT to parks to environmental facilities to NYCHA, public housing, et cetera, because in the past they all were separately doing their own work. So if you had flooding, in the waterfront park that's on the Upper East Side, and there's a bike trail, you have to have parks and DOT from the road and transportation from the bike trail and environmental protection for the stormwater management. And they all have to somehow together, but separately, agree to what's going to happen. So nothing happens. So on the state level, we have current legislation that Pete Harcum has put forward that would do the same thing on the state level. That would say we need like a climate czar in the adaptation space that can go across all the agencies and that has authority to say, like, these are the steps we need to take and we need to be in lockstep. So we're supporting that. I'm hopeful that will get through the session. Without that level of coordination, it's an insane patchwork. You can have Department of Transportation, in the city, doing nothing. Parks can put in a ton of green infrastructure, and when you have heavy rain, the subway system in New York City is the de facto stormwater catchment right now. You look at the flooding map in New York City, and where the big flooding problems are is where there isn't the subway, and where the subway is, it's just filling up with the water and holding it. And that's just not a strategy, right? So we have a long way to go.
Thank you for that. And just one more question on this too. I'm curious about also, the people who live along the Hudson and residential housing. Um, have you seen changes in, say, homeowners insurance, or, are people, is it going to become uninhabitable or unaffordable to live along the Hudson? Have you seen any trends in people moving away or, having to relocate as sea level rise happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So after Sandy, they did the first buyouts in the city, right? So I think the city is a good indicator of us of what's to come because it's right there on the ocean. And it is more of it's like a little state in and of itself. So we can look to them to example. So when Sandy happened, it was kind of, the emergency buyouts, which a lot of people took, especially on Staten Island. And then for about a decade after Sandy, you couldn't talk about buyouts or strategic retreat. Those were like third rail things. No one wants to talk about strategic retreat. No one wants to talk about buyouts. Now, just last year in the I forget which of the plans, maybe the Plan YC update, they're finally talking about strategic relocation slash retreat and buyouts as something that absolutely has to be in the mix. So I think what we're realizing now, we had the Army Corps of Engineers plans. After Sandy, they had the harbor and tributary study, which was supposed to go up the Hudson Valley and be protecting and investing in communities, all the way up to Ossining. And that got cut back and cut back and cut back and cut back. So it's all south of George Washington Bridge, and now maybe it's not happening at all because Trump famously defunded it in his first administration. So I think now we're at the point where we realize there's not going to be a big engineering solution. We're not going to get kind of walls and wetlands and reefs up fast enough to protect all of our infrastructure. So the reality of retreat or floodability. I think a lot of the assets in terms of like wastewater treatment plants and other civic assets that are in flood zones will be made flood sustainable where they can be inundated and dry out and still function. But definitely people will be losing flood insurance in some of these areas. And honestly, the fear of losing flood insurance, the fear of recognizing, especially for developers who still want to build in flood zones, that there won't be flood insurance, is such an economic chilling effect on their work that there's a lot of fights around flood maps. Flood maps are like a very contentious issue because people don't want to just kind of face the truth of what we're looking at now. So this is one of the areas where there's debate and why you will end up with like multiple projections and multiple maps because there is a big, strong contingency that just wants to keep building, building, building. And for developers, you can invest in these properties, and typically it's like a 50-year in and out to make your profit. You start building, and within 50 years, you've done it, you've sold it, you've got return on investment. So that's the window. So as long as you're still above water in 50 years, you can kind of make a case for investing money, but that window now is getting smaller and smaller. So I think all that reality is coming our way.
Great, thank you. Switching topics, wanted to talk a little bit more about salinity. Right, we've got the salinity that occurs as seawater moves up the estuary. And from what I understand, any sort of water treatment right now is not desalinization. Like we don't have
That's
a
right.
way to do that without, I'm assuming, massive amounts of spending.
Mhm.
But about road salt, there was a question that came in asking about regulations on winter salt distributions. I'm curious if the state is looking at this, or if are there municipal bans? I know some communities have switched to a diluted spray that is less, negative than the like just putting salt crystals down on the ground. But I'm curious. What's happening at the state level or local level around road salts?
Yeah, so we actually have two pieces of legislation that we're supporting that are moving now. So if people go to riverkeeper.org and go to take action and speak up, and Matt, I understand we'll follow up with some links. People can send a message to support these two pieces of legislation that are targeting road salts and what we need to do. And the community that's been leading on this is the Adirondacks. The Adirondacks has seen a lot of salinization of the lakes and very excessive use of road salt. So they've been shifting to brine and sand. And so there's brine, there's sand, there's also different technologies around the blades. The roads are curved to support the runoff of the rain, but the blades are straight. So there are blades, articulated blades you can get. There's a bunch of different strategies to dramatically reduce road salt, but for sure it just seems like it needs to be mandated because some communities are selecting to do it, but not enough. I think once we get these laws passed this session, knock wood, Riverkeeper is going to work on a model ordinance that we can be promoting and sharing with people who want to get local ordinances passed and kind of work at that local level to address road salts. It is a capital investment. If you're going to switch from road salts to brine or to articulated blade, there needs to be some funding for that. But there's also a lot we can do around just best practices of how much we're putting down. If it doesn't snow, kind of going back out, just like we shovel snow, we can shovel the salt back up. So there's a lot of work that can be done. And I do encourage people to support the state legislation. And if you Google road salts in New York, you'll see a big report that came out on this last month. So it's starting to come up higher in people's awareness. There is no wastewater, so we got to keep our fresh water. Fresh water is gold. So we really have to do everything to keep our freshwater sources fresh. And once groundwater, like a groundwater aquifer that people get well water from, gets salty, it takes decades for that to naturally work back through, and you're not going to build a little desal plant in your backyard. So the ramifications on the backside of missing this window to stop this problem is very significant. And like you said, Matt, building desal plants, it's doable. They have them, but it's very costly and very energy intensive, which we do not want.
Yeah, thank you. So I think related to that, you talked a bit about stormwater management. I'm assuming that some of the interventions like street trees or, planted water catchment basements at where the sewers are would also address the salt problem on some level, right? If that water's running down and it can be absorbed before it gets into our streams. There were a couple questions that came in around street trees, though, and someone asked that or mentioned that they'd been taught that street trees are bad for the tree, the pressure on roots, limited availability of water, nutrients to the trees, etc. And that makes those trees vulnerable to failing during more extreme weather events. They asked if shrubs or other plantings, such as native sedges or grasses that don't require mowing, could be a better option than trees. And I'm curious what you're seeing in street trees and um, what can be done to make sure that those trees thrive and survive.
Yeah, so that's a little out of my wheelhouse in horticulture. Um, but it is, it the trees do the most absorbing of the rainwater, right? They have by far the biggest canopy, so they're getting beyond, if you're planting something in a rain garden that doesn't have a tree, you're not getting very far beyond that footprint. Whereas if you have trees, you can really extend and get more rain. So, but I appreciate the concern about the health of the trees and maintaining the trees, and that seems like something that should just be prioritized in that planning for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and also related to that, there was a question. And Maggie mentions, and trees provide multiple benefits: cooling, air quality improvement, habitat. I'm a huge fan of street trees, especially as we are dealing with more urban heat island effect, which is really impacting our most vulnerable communities already.
Yeah.
Um, Related to that, there was a question that came in around sewage system overflow, which I know is a big issue in the Hudson Valley. I'm curious if you could talk more about that. And I know street trees can help with that, all of the wastewater, or rather the stormwater management solutions that you mentioned do. But could you talk a little bit more about sewage and how that's flowing into the Hudson and what could be done about that?
Yeah, so sewage is a huge source of pollution. It's so destructive for our waterways. And it's important to know that the wastewater treatment plants, most of which were funded and built after the Clean Water Act was passed in 1973. So it's like in America, it's like a lot of 1980s technology. And they were really just designed to treat, I'll say number two. So it's like fecal bacteria and solids. And going through our wastewater treatment plants, number one, we have high nitrogen. So that nitrogen, if in the Hudson River, is going directly into the waterways. We have people's pharmaceuticals, antidepressants, estrogen. We are getting the water from industry. PFAS is coming through the plants and not being treated there. all kinds of things. I mean, so many things go through these plants. So we're doing okay when we treat for number two, but we're still sending a lot of contaminants into the waterway. And when the plants have problems and they get inundated with rainwater because the collection pipes are in a state of disrepair and groundwater is getting mixed in, or rainwater gets in heavy rain, or we have an old combined sewer system that is just by design stormwater and sewage combined, then the plants, in order to deal with the fact that they're only partially treating the sewage because there's too much volume, so they kind of bypass what we call the tertiary treatment. They basically just do like screening, and then they add chlorine to kill the bacteria. So then you have all the pollutants you normally have, plus you're adding chlorine, which is another pollutant, just to kill bacteria. So it's a huge vector for pollution, and one that we absolutely should be able to manage to the proper degree. There is no reason at this time in this wealthy community where we have all the technology to treat our wastewater that this is still an issue. It's just a matter of will. It's nothing more than that. In the Hudson River, I encourage everyone, we can follow up with the link to sign up for the Sewage Right to Know law notifications to get a sense of if you have problems in your community. And then if you do, talk to your village, talk to your town or your city. The only place that is permitted, that is held accountable for what is dumped in the river is the wastewater treatment plants for their treated effluent. So they have permits, they're regulated, but all of our communities each own the pipes that run under our streets. And the pipes and the pumps that communities own generally are ignored because there's no permit, there's no oversight, they're invisible, out of sight, out of mind. So they really need to hear from their community that we're concerned about sewage getting in our waterways. We want them proactively televising pipes and doing repairs and doing maintenance on a regular capital schedule. They should do asset management plans. And we are trying to model what's called one water principle, where you get, instead of having every little town and village maintaining their own collection infrastructure, is to have the county or whoever is operating the plants be responsible for the whole system. This is what they do in New York City. New York City operates the plants and all the lines and all the pumps. So they look at the whole system. It's an advantage to them to not be treating rainwater and groundwater. So they have an incentive to keep everything in good repair and keep it tight, even though they do have a combined sewer system. Put that in the parking lot if anyone wants to talk about CSOs. But we're trying to get more communities. We're working right now. We have state legislation to get Westchester County to take over the collection infrastructure from the 42 municipalities that currently have the collection infrastructure in Westchester, because we have huge sewage overflow problems, and we have a combined sewer system in Yonkers. So it's just an ongoing, battle to stay on top of this source of pollution.
Um, well, we're basically out of time here. So Tracy, thank you so much. If we have time to stay on for one more minute, a number of
Sure.
questions came in just around things homeowners can do to deal with and prepare for these weather events, and maybe we'll end there. And while I'm still speaking, I just want to let you know our next webinar is on Tuesday, June 10th at 8:30. We'll have Doug Mueller from the Hudson Seed Company. I encourage you all to come. And yeah, Tracy, parting thoughts on what we can do at the individual level.
Yeah, so definitely keeping all the rain on your property. Keep the rain on your property. Don't use rock salt when the snow's coming. Use sand. It works great. I use it at my house. It doesn't corrode the walkways and create the damage of the salt. So please don't contribute to the salt issue. And reduce your energy usage, go electric, and let's just continue to kind of bend the curve on this climate crisis as much as we can by curbing our greenhouse gas emissions.
Great. Tracy, thank you so much for being with us. I encourage you all to visit riverkeeper.org and support their really important work. You can learn more about our work at Climate Action HV. We also rely on your support. So now more than ever, we need to really dig in and get involved in our communities. So Tracy, thank you again for all the really essential work that you do. We will follow up with links to things soon. And as I said, Tuesday, June 10th, 8:30, Doug Mueller from the Hudson Valley Seed Company. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And thank you again, Tracy. Have a great day.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for coming. Thanks for all you do.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Matt.